Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this Solo PR Pro webinar. I am so delighted to welcome our very special guest today, Josh Greene. Josh I've been calling him the Wikipedia Whisperer, but he's actually the CEO for the Mather Group, which is a digital agency that helps companies manage how they're found online through Wikipedia and search engine optimization. Prior to the Mather Group, Josh was the VP of marketing for 1-800-PACK-RAT and Zippy Shell, where he was responsible for all marketing, including online, offline, and the launch of national television campaigns. He was also the vice president of member services for shop.org, where he oversaw membership recruitment and retention initiatives. And he's also collaborated with NRF's government relations staff to execute policy and advocacy strategies on behalf of shop.org members. He has a very, very varied background, and he also has a brand new book, Wikipedia for Business 2021. And at the end of this webinar, we'll share with all of you how you can grab that book. Hey, Josh, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Karen. Thanks for having me today. I'm excited for the discussion and looking forward to it. If we can just do a quick tech check for the people on the phone, if you can just type yes in the questions box, if you can hear me and see the screen that says what the Wikipedia, we'll be sure that everything is working and we will get rolling right away. So again, the questions box should be somewhere in the GoToMeeting control panel. And if you just want to type yes in or I can hear you, that would be super helpful. Alrighty, thank you, Holly. A couple other people, thank you very much. So getting started, as Karen said, I'm with the Mather Group. We help companies manage how they're found online. The two big focuses are search engine optimization and Wikipedia. We work with everyone from very small to very big companies, helping them navigate the ever-changing world of the online community. So the first thing that really is helpful is just to understand a little bit about what Wikipedia was designed to be. And the idea behind Wikipedia was that it was going to be a crowdsourced encyclopedia compiling all of the world's knowledge, essentially, and it was going to be driven by a group of volunteer editors, and all the changes that they ever made to the encyclopedia would be visible so people could see how all of those pages had evolved over time and who had been involved in the editing process of them. So sort of a transparent way to see what had happened and how things had evolved. There are a number of reasons why it's important. A couple of the key ones are that people generally view Wikipedia as an objective research tool. A lot of times you'll go to a company website and then go to Wikipedia to try and get a feel for what's the company is really about and has going on. And Wikipedia usually shows up at least twice on the front page of a Google search for a company, a person, or an organization. And there's actually a third way that's just come out in the last week or so that we'll show you as well. So it has a huge impact on what people see when they go looking for a client of yours. It also provides a lot of subconscious proof that you may not even be aware of in terms of what's going on when you do a search. For example, if you do a search on IBM on the left side, some of those things that you're seeing are sort of signals that this is a big, probably noteworthy company. You've got some ads, the company page, you've got Wikipedia over here in the knowledge graph. And then on the right side, you've got Baldino's Locks and Keys, which is a local business, and you've got a bunch of locations popping up, and then you've got this map pack that's showing you where they're physically located. So what that sort of signals is that's more of a local business than a big business. And you also get the same kind of thing with people. Unfortunately, I am never going to be the most famous or highly ranked Josh Greene. There's a world famous author from Harvard who's published a number of bestsellers. And you can see that he's got a search result here, he's got a Wikipedia result here, and he's got all this information over here about him. So really the signal that you're sort of seeing with Wikipedia is this is probably who you're looking for, versus over here on the other side, you've got a search on Ben Isley, and Google doesn't have a definitive result. It gives you a bunch of directory type sites. Here's Facebook, here's some LinkedIn. Maybe one of these is what you're looking for. So there's some subconscious signals that get sent as well for famous people, CEOs, when you do searches on them. So really the first thing to think about is just understanding Wikipedia. And the key thing that everyone has always heard is, yes, anyone can update Wikipedia. Anyone can edit Wikipedia. And probably the question that everyone should follow up and ask after that is, and how long will my edits stay live? Which is the more important question, because you always see sort of funny Wikipedia stories or human interest stories where you have a heavyweight boxer editing each other's pages for psychological warfare, things like that as a result of the anyone can edit page. And as we get a little bit into things, we'll go over how that actually works in practice. One of the big questions we always get is how is a Wikipedia page created? Usually it begins with a Wikipedia editor deciding that there is a hole in the knowledge that's covered in Wikipedia. There are also places within Wikipedia where you can request for someone to create a page. So if you have an idea for some content for Wikipedia, that's oftentimes where a new page suggestion will go. What happens then is someone takes a template. Usually if you're doing a company, you'd clone another company's page and start customizing it. This is the Wikipedia markup language. It looks a little like HTML if you're familiar with that. And you go in and you essentially code the page. You put in all the citations, you write the page, you get it ready to publish where you can sort of read it and preview it. And then it gets published where it goes through an approval process where essentially there are about 2,500 or so Wikipedia editors who have what are called the permissions to approve things. And what'll oftentimes happen is then you'll get a yay, nay, or a maybe in terms of, yes, this is now a live Wikipedia page. No, it's not a Wikipedia page. Or it could be a Wikipedia page. Here are a bunch of things you ought to fix and resubmit it again. And one of the things, if you sort of really flinched when you saw that coding on the previous slide, the Wikipedia community realized that was a big issue, and they were probably pushing away a certain percentage of potential Wikipedia editors who maybe weren't tech savvy but had a huge amount of knowledge to contribute. So several years back, they came out with this visual style editor on the left side that translates Wikipedia visuals to the code underneath it. So you can go in and just edit like you're editing Word. There are a bunch of tools that make it easier. There's a citations tool that will automatically generate citations for you. It used to be that you had to have 5 or 6 different data points when you were adding in a citation. So this has really added in a new population of editors as it's made things much easier, so that if this is not necessarily how you want to be involved, there's another option for you. One of the other key things about Wikipedia is you can see every edit that's been made to every page ever. So you can sort of zoom in and see any revision that's been made to a page, when that revision took place. You'll also see the username of the editor who made that revision. There's a talk page in case you wish to communicate with them. There's contributions, so you can see every edit they've made to Wikipedia. That can give you a good feel of what kind of editor you're dealing with. There's some people who just edit business pages. There's some people who just edit Wikipedia for grammar mistakes. There's some people who edit it for categories. So that can be really useful information. You can also see the size of the page and how much it changed for each edit. And then you can typically see a small snippet saying what happened on the page. The best practice for Wikipedia as you edit a page is to make a note of what you're doing so anyone coming after you can get a feel for what was going on. And then there's even an undo button here where you can go in and revert an edit if you've made one by mistake or if there's something inaccurate. So there are a lot of tools that you can use to sort of figure out what's been going on historically with a page. And oftentimes one of the most frequent things is just going in and taking a look and seeing how frequently that page is being edited, which can give you a useful guideline for how tricky it might be if you wanted to go ahead and make a change to that page. Usually if there are a lot of edits going on, that tends to mean there are a number of editors who are interested in what's going on with that page. One of the interesting things about Wikipedia is that Wikipedians love almost more than editing Wikipedia is arguing about the right way to edit Wikipedia, which is one of the perils of crowdsourced platforms. You end up with a little bit of this Orwell quote about all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And there's a certain amount of experience that comes with editing Wikipedia in terms of what the rules are and how things work. So you can avoid getting banned or having your company banned or your IP address banned, which sounds a lot scarier than it may really be. But just by way of example, Wikipedia spent about 3 years arguing whether the correct pronunciation was Danzig or Gdansk, as you can sort of see on the screen. And it just is interesting to think that there were 3 years of arguing about that before they came to any sort of resolution. And you can sort of see how people feeling passionate about that can spill over into their feelings about corporations, about organizations and CEOs, which can make things a little bit tricky sometimes. So as part of that, one of the key things you want to do is just educate internally and make sure that people in your organization or your clients know what some of the options are or that might be options for you in dealing with things. One key thing on every Wikipedia page is there's a talk page as part of the 5 tabs at the top of every page. The talk page is where you're supposed to discuss bigger picture changes to a page before you go ahead and make them. So that can be anything from the very serious pay ratios and how they should be treated to satanic signs in commercials. But it can really give you a good sense of what the big discussions have been in the history of the page, so you don't inadvertently jump into editing that main page without knowing whether something has been decided on or talked about before you were ready to make those changes. And in terms of that, there are a few best practices for Wikipedia. And I would encourage anyone who's thinking about editing Wikipedia themselves to avoid just jumping in on the page you care most about and starting to edit. If you start out a little slower, there's less risk of edits being reverted. It gives you a little more time to figure out how things work and generally having a much greater chance for success if you get a feel for Wikipedia as you're navigating around. There are a number of really important Wikipedia rules, and some of them are in direct contradiction to the general approach of PR and marketing folks. Wikipedia is designed to be an encyclopedia, so it's very important you have a neutral point of view. Wikipedia is not really a fan of adjectives about the best or world class unless there's actual things proving that. and those sources need to be notable and reliable. And the trick with reliable sources for Wikipedia, and we'll go through that a bit, is they can't be things you've published yourself, and they need to be available online so people can verify that that's what a source actually said. There's also a very strong view towards copyright. If anything is cut and pasted from an external source that's online, Wikipedia will usually flag it and take it down as a copyright violation. So if you have sort of the perfect wording about an organization that you've developed that's on their website, you're not going to be able to use it without changing it up a bunch. And the other one that's really challenging is notability. And this usually comes into play if you're trying to set up a new Wikipedia page. For something to get a page, it needs to be notable. And unfortunately, Wikipedia's definition is very colloquial and very different from a CEO's definition. In Wikipedia, it means a bunch of third-party articles about a company or individual, not articles where they're interviewed or where they're quoted. So if you've been on CNN, 20 times, that doesn't really help as much as a couple of profiles of your company. And that can be a challenging concept sometimes to manage expectations about. In terms of sources, you can't use self-published sources. Wikipedia assumes that those are sort of self-motivated, so is a much bigger fan of trusted news sources like newspapers. Academic articles tend to be the gold standard. Just one caveat, the bigger you are and the smaller the edit, there tends to be a little bit more leeway for self-published sources, even if it's not generally the way it works. If that's the only place the information's available, you usually have a reasonable shot of it sticking as part of an edit. The third of sort of the 5 tactics is just understanding what can go wrong when you're on Wikipedia. You really want to avoid the situation where you get the message or the phone call that just says, Houston, we have a problem. And there are 3 major things that we've sort of seen where Wikipedia can ruin your day. One is that Wikipedia can get edited at any time. 2 is false and biased information. And the third is the prevalence of controversies on Wikipedia. The first is just Wikipedia can get edited at any time. These times that you're seeing on the page on screen here, you can see are all in Greenwich Mean Time. And the running joke here is just the worst time to have a page edited is about 30 seconds before the CEO happens to check the page and wonders what's going on. Just one quick note on the sources thing. If your client is interviewed, then yeah, Wikipedia is going to consider that not a reliable source. It may be able to stick for a few reasons, but generally speaking, it's not what Wikipedia is looking for in the way of sources, which tends to be terribly frustrating just because it seems like your client is going to know what their organization is up to. I've sat with the head of HR for a 4,000 person company who literally had their SAP system up and there wasn't a public source for how many employees they had. So you can end up in some situations that seem just very absurd or that you're sort of, you've gone through the looking glass a little bit.
So Josh, just to clarify that, because I know that Mira, this question hits at the heart of many PR people. If your client is on a, on a broadcast show such as CNN, and they're part of a, expert panel, so they're, called in because they're the expert on a particular type of volcano and there has been an eruption and they're interviewed on CNN, is that an appearance that would count, or would it be something like they contributed an article that got published in Inc. magazine, then would that be okay? Because that's, I want to make sure that we have that clear.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about Wikipedia is the answer to just about everything is it depends. But in that scenario, if they were part of a panel that was interviewed about a volcano, that would probably be a usable source of information for a Wikipedia page about the volcano. However, it wouldn't be or it shouldn't be used for an article about Josh Greene, volcano whisperer, because then it's me talking about myself. So, you know, it gets tricky all of the time. But if you were trying to set up a page for that CEO who is on about the volcano, generally that would not or could be taken down on the basis that it was a self-referential appearance. And sort of the second thing along those lines, if an annual report is published by a company and it's public record, why is it not considered a reliable source? So it's not considered a reliable source because it's an entity talking about itself. An annual report in the scheme of things is way more reliable than a company blog, for example, because there are, you know, legal penalties and it's vetted all kinds of different ways. And I will say that I see annual reports cited all the time. So it's one of those rules that in practice is a little grayer than it may actually sound. But technically, no, it's not a reliable source. There are pages and pages and pages of arguments about what constitutes a reliable source. And you have arguments about places like Forbes, which has, you know, contributor networks versus the real magazine. So my general experience has been if there's a fact in an annual report, you can usually get it to stick in Wikipedia, even though the official rule is that they shouldn't be there. And then, yeah, the other question sort of going along is client interviews talking about their company don't count. And it's the same answer. Generally, they'll get taken down if someone's editing a page because there's someone talking about their own company or business. And happy to follow up on that, Karen, if other questions come in. In terms of that editing at any time, this was the CEO of United, who back when people were flying, they had dragged someone off of a plane, and someone referred to it as a sort of self-immolation that makes you wonder about his choice as CEO, which is, you know, a wonderful turn of phrase, but definitely not neutral, and the kind of thing that can pop up on pages if no one's paying attention to them. They can also get edited with just about anything. So you'll see things like Orrin Hatch was doxxed with his home address published, which is definitely not a fun thing to have happen. You also get a lot of false and biased information. So usually when you see a phony celebrity died thing, someone will have gone in and changed their Wikipedia page. It'll usually get reverted right away, but by that point, someone's taken a screenshot, and that can be a basis for that hoax getting started, or sort of, in air quotes, proof for whoever starts it and forwards it around. There are all kinds of hoaxes. Some of them are kind of harmless, that, you know, Lord Byron kept a crocodile and a honey badger as pets. You know, that one lasted almost 10 years. I would guess that there were also probably 0 people on Earth who were concerned with Lord Byron's pets, but false information does have a way of creeping in, especially on the margins. And then you have just certain pages are just locked because they would be just continuous edit wars. Religious pages tend to be a pretty good example of that. And then you see that on everything from country music fans fighting about their favorite artists to Supreme Court nominations. And then the one that probably resonates a little bit more with some of the people on the call is just the fact that the controversies can sort of just keep growing on Wikipedia. You know, I at one point worked at Discovery, and there was a page and a half of information about this very brief hostage-taking incident at one of their facilities. It lasted a half hour, nobody was hurt, but there was more information on the manifesto of this person and the circumstances than there was on, you know, a billion-dollar company, because an editor and the community were just very interested in it. So the controversy section just kept growing. Similarly, I've never seen a section called executive compensation that was commending a company on the great job that they've done. So that's an important thing to keep an eye on. And then you also have some companies that are sort of in the sweet spot of controversy for Wikipedia, where Monsanto has a controversy section that keeps going and going and going, which also goes along with, it's entirely possible that Wikipedia is the least of your problems. If you're, you know, Wells Fargo or a politician in scandal, this may not be a top priority for you. So another key tactic, the fourth one, is just knowing your resources. There are webinars like these. Wikipedia is designed around users contributing. So in sort of the vein of the open source movement, there is a ton of really, really good content on Wikipedia itself about how to navigate Wikipedia. And just knowing who on your team is managing it, whether it's internally or externally, just knowing you have a go-to person who's thought a little bit about it can be really useful if you do end up in some sort of crisis situation. And finally, just having a plan for things that can happen. What needs updating on a page? What kind of thing would be very important versus mildly important? Who's going to do it, and just how are you going to manage it? So if there is something going on with Wikipedia that you're navigating with the client, if it's something that's been talked about beforehand, it's much easier to deal with when there's something to navigate, in much the same way that having a crisis plan makes it a lot easier to deal with a crisis. So what we can do now is take a look live at some Wikipedia pages. If you are interested in putting a page in, or one that you're interested in, you can do that in the chat, or I'm sorry, in the questions, and we'll go through them. Good question here. Should a company edit its own page? Isn't that a clear violation of COI? So COI is conflict of interest. In general, if you're a company and you're editing a page, the absolute white hat option is to post something on the talk page saying that you're a representative of the company, and here's what you would suggest needs to be updated on the page. There are a variety of editors who do sort of monitor that and then reply back yes and no, and make edits to the pages in response to those requests. It's a little bit of a kludgy system or a broken system. Wikipedia has a lot of challenges in terms of dealing with companies, and it depends what the end goal for that particular company is. But the talk page is always a really good place to start to see what's gone on for that company in terms of the history of their Wikipedia page. So I
And Josh,
had, oh, yep.
we got a lot of questions in advance of the webinar, so I want to make sure that we get to answer those. Does anybody have a live Wikipedia page that you would like to see, or should we keep going with questions? Okay.
And sometimes it takes a bit to come through, so we can go through those questions, and hopefully whoever asked those questions or sent them to Karen is on the webinar to
Yes.
Okay, great. So we'll go through them maybe in the context of a couple of the pages that are sort of here that I'll click through and can walk through. And this first one, AARP, I suspect is a really good example. One of the first things I do when I look at a page is just look at the dates. So if I look at the info box over here, the most recent statistics are from 2016. The statistic on the number of members is from 2018. So that says to me probably no one has been terribly interested in updating the page, be it someone from the company or just someone who happens to be interested. The second place I'll usually look is the table of contents to get a feel for what's on the page. And what you can see here are class action lawsuits, Senate investigation, and executive compensation, which as I mentioned earlier, is probably not positive. So I'll click through to the controversies things because that'll usually give you a pretty good idea of the tone of things going on. Let's see, 2014. So the interesting thing about this is all fairly dated information and a little bit too much information in that 7 years ago there was an issue. It doesn't look like that person is even the CEO anymore. And then also you have this Charity Navigator stat over here. So what AARP has done is, if we go over to the talk page, you'll see this. Hi, I'm an AARP employee. I've disclosed my conflict of interest, and here's the requested change. If you can sort of see the extended content, and then there's a really detailed explanation. So in this case, Jeffrey Arthur, who I'm sure if we pulled up on LinkedIn, would probably be a representative of AARP, and now you've got someone from the general Wikipedia community saying this has been addressed. The challenge with this is you can see this was posted on September 8th and answered on September 28th. If it's something that's super timely, that can be challenging. So the interesting thing about Wikipedia is when I reference the company, the approach to companies being broken, a lot of times anything that's requested from someone with any sort of conflict of interest will be immediately shot down. So then the question becomes, how do you get accurate information into Wikipedia? To which there are a bunch of different answers. And one of the nice things I would say in terms of working with companies or organizations is most of them just want neutral fact-based language, which is really what Wikipedia aspires to. And from what I've seen with most of the companies that I've worked with, there's generally a question of frustration about just how does actual reliable information get in there. They aren't looking to add a list of 15 awards they've won, but they would just like, you know, the latest revenue numbers or number of employees to be up to date, or the company's name has changed, or things like that. So this is definitely the place you want to start as a company representative. And then if it does or does not work, you can sort of go from here to determine what your next step might be. One thing that came up in terms of the questions is, should PR people market Wikipedia editing services, as a more general question? And my answer to that would be no. It's a giant pain. It never has a concrete deliverable. The challenge with Wikipedia is it can get changed anytime from now to 5 years from now. Most clients don't understand that, and oftentimes will treat it as the same as a deliverable. Like you finish a press release, finally at some point everyone signs off, and there's an understanding that that's the final form of the press release. You can edit a Wikipedia page, and 10 minutes later someone, you know, redoes your grammar, or 6 months later someone makes substantial changes, and that can be really tough for a client to understand. And especially given that I think most of the people on the call are solos, it can just become a giant time suck, because there seems to be that expectation that you're just going to fix Wikipedia, and fixing Wikipedia is a very, very, very substantial undertaking. So as I said earlier, there are a lot of answers in the "it depends" category. The other thing that sort of gets interesting as you go down the AARP page is you've got some things that are the AAP awards. You've got health insurance, which AARP offers, and then, you know, you've got stuff that's 15 years old. So this is a tricky situation here. I suspect that AARP is so big, they may very well have a very large agency that has someone who can do, who does nothing but give them advice on how to navigate Wikipedia and other pages like that. If we were super curious, we can click on View History and sort of go down and see how frequently it's been edited. You know, right here, we're seeing that no one's even edited the page in 2021 except for this one minor edit. So for whatever reason, AARP's page doesn't seem super active, which is not what I would have guessed to be the case. One of the other things that sort of comes up, and that's on here, was, how does Wikipedia conduct investigations into vandalism on a page? And the first thing to keep in mind is there really isn't a Wikipedia central body. There are aggregations of individuals. There's still the Wikimedia Foundation that sort of maintains the servers and everything, but it's very much community run. And one of the challenges with that is just the answer that was right today might not be right tomorrow. In terms of vandalism, there are tons of bots that various Wikipedia editors have created that will flag obvious vandalism. If you go to edit a page, put a curse word in and hit publish, or delete, you know, 6 sentences with no reason and take out a lot of citations, usually those will get reverted instantaneously by automated bots that will leave sort of an explanation of what's happened and why it's happened. Then there's sort of a scale down from there. Usually there's some amount of editors watching a page, and if someone makes an edit that's inaccurate or not helpful or vandalism, but not as egregious to get caught by one of those bots, usually one of the editors who sort of keeps an eye on the page, you can sign up for alerts whenever a page is edited, will go in and change it. There is also an actual appeals process where you can appeal to the community at large and have a debate over changes. That's usually it starts with editing on the page, then it goes to a discussion on the talk page, and ultimately there's an appeals process where there's sort of a board of administrators that you can get to if something is substantial enough. Usually out and out vandalism gets reverted. The edit wars come more when people have a different point of view about things, or where someone's really interested in, say, trolling a company because maybe they used to work there and they didn't like it or got fired. Maybe they got burned by the company's stock. Maybe they work for a competitor. And those are sort of the trickier cases when there's someone on the other side of it who's sort of deliberately trying to sabotage a page. The second one I had here, and again, if anyone has another page they want us to look at beyond these two, just put them in the questions box or the chat box, and we'll go to them. Let's see. So this is a charitable organization preserving battlefields, also out of date, which is interesting. And this is one of those sweet spots for Wikipedia where it's sort of a geeky hobby topic where there's likely to be someone or multiple someones who are obsessive about a topic. And it's also one of the weaknesses of Wikipedia. If I want to find out anything about Star Trek Season 2 from 1953, it's probably going to be a comprehensive amount of information. If I want to find out about sub-Saharan female politicians, much less information. And to its credit, the Wikipedia community is aware of that, holds a lot of events to try and recruit editors from underserved populations to try and correct some of that imbalance. So oftentimes what you'll do when you click on view history for something like this and scroll down is you'll see there's an editor called Save Our History who has made some very, very big changes to the page. And then we can look at the contributions. And yeah, this is clearly someone who, for the most part, does nothing but obsessively update information about different battles. So that can be, good and bad depending on what side of the fence someone happens to land if they're making edits on your page. Next question is, how do you deal with reliable sources from books or documents that are not available online? There are a couple different ways. A lot of books are available in Google Books as they continue to work on sort of scanning everything. So oftentimes you can reference it there, or an Amazon reference. If it's not online genuinely anywhere, sometimes you can just make a reference to an out-of-print publication, or there's something called Wikidata, which is the data store for all the information that's on Wikipedia and elsewhere, where it's, collecting discrete facts about entities. And it's sort of very geeky to get into, but you could publish images from those books or documents and then cite them, sort of providing them as a reference check for anyone who might want to go back and check the citation on the page. For the most part, if you put that much effort in, the benefit of the doubt will accrue to you in the Wikipedia world, and usually it'll be accepted. We've generally seen most books, either the Google Books option or the Wikidata option will get you to where you want to be in terms of that source. And it's tricky because oftentimes that may be the book is the only source for that particular piece of information. And always happy to talk about something specific if you have an example that you're trying to navigate through. Oh, go ahead, Karen.
Josh, when I look over some of these questions, and I'm sort of summarizing too, as PR people, and we've gone through this and we've seen, how difficult it can be to conduct edits on behalf of a client. What really is the best practice for a PR person to handle? Because we've all confronted that situation where a client either does not have a Wikipedia page and they would like one, or they have one and they want changes on it. So what are the best practices for us as, PR people?
My short answer is almost just try not to get involved with it. Once you take ownership of it, it can just spiral. I think I had mentioned this at one point. I had worked at a gas station. They taught me how to fix nail holes in tires one summer when I was a high schooler, and I had someone pull in when I was working alone on a weekend who had a nail hole, and I was like, "We'll fix it. Let's put it on the ramp." And no one had ever pointed out to me that if you took a car with a low clearance and drove it onto the ramp, you would rip off the undercarriage of the car. And I promptly now had a car that was missing a lot of the plastic undercarriage covering, in addition to a hole in the tire. And all of a sudden I was wishing I had just suggested they drive on down the road a little bit. It's kind of similar to that, in that, if people want a Wikipedia page, probably 80% of the people you're talking to aren't going to qualify for one, and they're going to be annoyed about it. So I would, I'm always happy to take a quick look at a person or at a company and just say, I think you have a shot at this, or no, you're probably not going to be able to get there. And then I would also say that I would avoid trying to edit a page yourself. I would probably put yourself in the continued role of trusted counselor, in terms of, is the information on Wikipedia significant enough for us to make an edit on it? The question I often ask clients is, hey, is this worth essentially a couple $1,000s to fix? Because if you're doing it right, you're going to spend the time on it to fix it. And oftentimes it changes from a no, anyone can edit it, I just want you to go in and edit it. And if the answer is, well, I could do that, but things might also break and you could lose the page, or you could end up in an edit war, would you then be willing to pay for it? It changes the answer a lot for a lot of people. So I think that the key for PR people is sort of helping evaluate the context of what the issue is with Wikipedia, and it's something that needs to be fixed or not. If a number is wrong and you see that 5 people a day are visiting that page, that may not be the thing that you're activating the crisis communications plan for, versus if there's false information about the CEO having been in some horrible situation, then bring in the type of professional you would like to deal with that. If it was a need for a press situation, but I would the biggest trap I see is the, oh yeah, that's wrong, I'll just go in and edit it because anyone can edit it. And that actually in many ways ends up being our biggest source of leads, is the people who did it themselves and then found themselves with an unintended consequence.
Have we hit on all the questions? Are there any more questions from the audience? And I think you may have covered this, but apart from commenting on the talk page, what is the appeals process for having a client's page change? And I'm assuming that this question is dealing with factual errors, not.
Yeah, it usually is. There's an appeals board that you can usually find pretty easily. A lot of times if the talk page doesn't work, or no one's paying attention to it, there's something called the Teahouse, where they, which is sort of the equivalent of a chat board for Wikipedia editors. And oftentimes it's fairly straightforward to just pop in and sort of raise your hand and say, hey, no one's taken a look at this, but can you correct this factual thing, and here's why. And that usually works pretty well for factual things. The appeal/arbitration process is when you get into the really gnarly stuff. But for the most part, and what I would imagine most people on the webinar would have to deal with, it's just finding a Wikipedia editor to spend the time to help fix the situation. And I would say most Wikipedia editors are generally pretty helpful in that they have the same goal of wanting Wikipedia to have good information that people can rely on. If Wikipedia is not meeting that goal, it really loses a lot of its value to the people who rely on it.
Did that answer the questions? I'm just looking at the ones that we submitted in advance and make sure that we.
Yeah, and this is probably a good wrap-up question. Is it my general recommendation the PR people stay away from editing Wikipedia? Yes, that is my general recommendation. And I will caveat that by saying, if you can't resist, edit something that you're personally interested in that's not going to affect you professionally first. I got involved in Wikipedia because I was a diehard track and field fan. Wikipedia had a bunch of gaps in the information and inaccuracies, and I went off very motivated to fix the internet, which, as everyone knows, is never a good idea. Which is how I got into Wikipedia editing. But if you are in PR and genuinely feel like you're interested in doing this, there are pages and pages of lists of pages that need help editing. Bad grammar, not full information, but in general, I would say yes, stay away from it unless there's a really, really, really good reason.
And so the key takeaway is it's a rabbit hole that PR people really shouldn't go down, unless it's something like, so let's say that there's your client's company has a page on Wikipedia, and the CEO that is listed there hasn't been there in 3 years, and you just want to update that. That's a fairly straightforward thing that you could put on the talk page, hey, there's a new CEO, and then point to where they can find the information to verify it? Or is that also something that seems like it would be super easy to do, but it really isn't?
So the absolute white hat way would be to post on the talk page. And then there's also occasionally a little bit of the real world, in that if you were at a coffee shop and you updated a factual bit of information for a large company because the CEO changed, it probably would have a decent chance of sticking. The the challenge is if it's not one of those times when your do-it-yourself moment works, then you've got a much bigger situation. So it's sort of a risk reward type of situation if you do decide to try and do something yourself. You know, in general, if you're correcting the wrong CEO, that's probably useful information in the greater, you know, Wikipedia world. But on the other hand, there are plenty of people who might be happy to misconstrue it for their own purposes. So, you know, it's a question of what your goal is in doing that, and whether or not you want to, you know, try and say, I'll fix it myself. The challenge is if you do that, then the assumption is going to be you can fix Wikipedia, which, you know, the next time might not be something quite as easy and straightforward.
So our default should always be, if we have a change, then go to the talk pages and make the recommendation that it's updated and share the reliable sources and leave it to the Wikipedia editors.
Yes. Comma, if you have someone in the organization who's familiar with Wikipedia, have them coach you through that process.
Got it. Are there any other questions before we wrap up today? Well, Josh, I just want to thank you so much for sharing so generously of your time. I want to remind all of you, the participants, and if you know anyone who couldn't attend today, if you registered for this webinar, you will absolutely get the recording via email. Sometimes it converts the recording pretty quickly. And so as soon as it's done, it will come out, but that's never longer than 24 hours. So expect that to come. On your screen, you will see information about how you can reach Josh. He's provided not only his email address and his phone number. And I want to tell you all, as our special thank you from Solo PR Pro today for joining this webinar live, which I know is really, really tough these days with all the things going on. We want to share a copy of Josh's book with you, Wikipedia for Business 2021. So if you would like a copy of the book, it's absolutely free. We will take care of, you know, the shipping charges and the book costs for you, but we will need you to just send us your name and where you want your copy of the book sent, and you can send that to me at Karen@soloprpro.com, or if you would like to send it directly to Josh, you can do that as well. If you're not already following us online, we invite you to visit our website at soloprpro.com, and you'll see all of our great free resources. And you can also go to the join column if you're not yet a pro member and learn more about Solo PR Pro membership. You can also listen to our podcast, That Solo Life, at that same tab. And Josh, in addition to your email and phone number, where else can folks find you online?
Well, most of my social online handles are linked at themathergroupllc.com. So just take a look there and look forward to connecting.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Josh. It's always insightful talking to you about Wikipedia. I always walk away knowing that I'm just going to steer clear of it. So thank you for that. I think you've saved me a lot of stress. I hope that you all learned a lot from this session. And again, we thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of the afternoon.
Thanks for having me.